I got my coworker fired without telling a single lie. No fake emails, no bad-mouthing him in a meeting. I didn't touch his files, didn't report him for anything, didn't say one word against him to anyone who mattered. All I did was stay 2 hours later than him every single day for 4 months because I knew our boss was watching the clock, not the work. And I knew he'd never stay that late. He had a daughter, soccer practice, a life he wasn't willing to trade for a promotion. I was. By the time the layoffs hit, there was only one name on the list. His. I liked him. That's the part people don't expect. This isn't a story about a villain coworker who deserved it. This is a story about what happens when you realize the game was never fair to begin with, and you decide to win it anyway. Here's exactly how I did it from the beginning, because the beginning is where I stopped being able to blame anyone else for it. I worked in logistics compliance for a mid-sized freight company. If you don't know what that means, don't worry, nobody at the company knew what it meant either, which was sort of the problem. We were the department nobody could explain at parties. We audited paperwork. We made sure shipments matched manifests, matched invoices, matched customs declarations. Thrilling stuff. But it mattered, because one wrong number on one form could cost the company 6 figures in fines, and every one of us had watched that happen to someone else's department at least once. There were 6 of us on the compliance team. Then in March our director sat us down and said the word everyone dreads hearing in a beige conference room: restructuring. Not everyone would be restructured, just 2 of us. They didn't tell us who. That was the cruelty of it. They let it sit there unspoken for 6 weeks, while we all smiled at each other in the break room and refreshed our resumes at our desks with the screen tilted just slightly away from the door. 6 weeks is a long time to sit in a room with people, pretending you're not measuring them. I did the math obsessively, the way you do when your rent is due on the first no matter what your employer decides. I had 2 years less seniority than Priya. I had worse metrics than Delray, who somehow never made mistakes, not once, not in 3 years. I had a worse relationship with the director than Amara, who'd known her since college, who she still met for drinks sometimes on Fridays. And I had almost identical numbers to Trent. Trent and I were on paper interchangeable, same start date within a week of each other, same error rate, same close rate on audits. If they were cutting 2 people and 4 of us were clearly safe, that left exactly 2 names in the drawing, mine and his. I want to be honest about something. I didn't hate Trent. I liked him. He brought his dog's photo as his lock screen, a scruffy little terrier named Biscuit who chewed through 2 of his work bags. He remembered that my mother was in the hospital in February and asked about her every week after, not performatively, not the way people ask just to seem considerate, but like he actually held onto it, like it mattered to him whether she was doing better. If you told me in January that I would do what I eventually did to him, I would have told you that you had the wrong person entirely. But February became March, and March became April, and I had a lease and a car payment, and a mother who was, by then, out of the hospital but not out of the bills, not even close. And somewhere in the space between those numbers, something in me went quiet and cold and started calculating in a way it never had before. Here's what I noticed about how the company measured us, once I actually looked closely instead of just working hard and hopping for the best. It wasn't really about accuracy. It was about presence. Our director, whether she admitted it or not, equated staying late with commitment. She'd walk past the floor at 6:30, sometimes 7, on her way to whatever late meeting she had, and whoever's light was still on got a little nod. A little mental checkmark, invisible, unspoken, but real. I'd seen it happen for 2 years. It was never said out loud in a review. Nobody's ever going to write "stayed later than colleagues" as an official reason for a layoff. But I'd watched 2 prior restructurings go exactly the way you'd expect once you started paying attention. The person who left earliest, even by 20 minutes, even if their actual output was identical down to the decimal, was the one who got cut both times. Trent left early, every day like clockwork, in a way that had nothing to do with laziness. He came in earlier than any of us, 7 a.m. sharp, put in a full 8, sometimes 9 hours, more work done before lunch than most of us did all day. And then he left at 5 on the dot because he coached his daughter's soccer team on weeknights. He told me this with a kind of quiet pride once, over coffee in the break room, the 2 of us the only ones in early. "I don't miss her practices," he said. "Missed enough when I was traveling for my old job. Whole seasons of her growing up that I only saw in photos my wife sent me. Not doing that again, not for anything." I remember nodding and telling him that was really admirable and meaning it. And I remember, later that same night, sitting in my car in the parking garage with the engine off, writing something down in the Notes app on my phone that I am not proud of, that I have never told anyone until right now. Trent leaves at 5, I could stay till 7, 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, 10 hours a week she sees me and doesn't see him. I didn't act on it right away. I want to be clear about that because I think the gap matters, because it's the difference between an impulse and a decision. I sat with that thought for 11 days before I did anything about it. 11 days of telling myself I wasn't really going to do this. I was just noticing a pattern, that's all, just noticing, the way you notice the weather. On day 12, my mother called to ask if I could help with a bill, just a small one. $200 for a prescription her insurance wouldn't cover in full. I stayed until 7:15 that night. It was the easiest $200 I ever earned, and it cost more than I understood. I didn't sabotage Trent. I need you to understand that distinction clearly, because what I did next is somehow both less dramatic, and I think worse than sabotage would have been. I didn't touch his files. I didn't badmouth him, not once, not even in the careful, deniable way people do when they want credit for cruelty without the blame. I didn't do a single thing that, if you looked at it in isolation, on any given day, you could call malicious. All I did was become visible in the specific, narrow way our director rewarded, and let Trent remain exactly who he already was, which, it turns out, is sometimes all it takes. I started arriving at 7:45 instead of 8. Small, deniable, nothing anyone would question. I started staying until 6:45, then 7, then, on the nights I really wanted her to see me, until she herself left, so that whatever time she walked out, my light was still the one on behind her, glowing through the glass wall of our office like a lighthouse for an audience of one. I picked up small tasks nobody asked for. I offered to help Amara reconcile a batch of international manifests that technically weren't mine, staying an extra hour to do it. I said yes to a Saturday audit in May that I absolutely did not need to attend, that could have waited until Monday with zero consequence. I made myself available in a way that had nothing to do with skill and everything to do with theatre, a performance nobody in the audience knew they were watching. And the quiet part, the part I still think about at 2 a.m. sometimes, the part that costs me the most sleep, is that I started very gently, very carefully asking Trent about his evenings. Not to sabotage him, not directly, just to keep the calendar of his absence fresh in my own mind, so I'd know exactly how the light looked on a night when his desk was dark and mine wasn't, so I could compare the two like a scientist logging data. How was the game? I'd ask on a Tuesday, genuinely wanting to know, and that's the part that still doesn't make sense to me even now. She scored twice, he'd say, grinning, pulling out his phone to show me a shaky video, his daughter's ponytail bouncing across the screen, and I would smile back and feel something curdle quietly in my chest, because I already knew even as I smiled that I was going to use that grin against him. Not by telling anyone, not by reporting it. Just by letting it exist unspoken next to my own overtime in whatever invisible ledger our director was keeping in her head every time she walked the floor. By June, the pattern was undeniable, even to people who weren't looking for it. I was the one who's always here. Delry joked about it in the break room, you sleeping under your desk now, and I laughed like it was funny. Amara told me I should take it easy, that I looked tired, and she wasn't wrong. Our director started stopping by my desk at 6:30 just to chat, which she never used to do before March. Small talk about nothing, a show she was watching, traffic on the highway, but I understood exactly what it was underneath the small talk. It was her building her own case in her own head for a decision she hadn't officially made yet, and I was feeding her the evidence one quiet evening at a time. The night I went too far. I want to tell you about one specific Thursday because it's the night I stopped being able to tell myself I was just working hard, the night the story stopped being about ambition and started being about something uglier. There was a shipment discrepancy that came in at 4:40 p.m, nothing urgent, genuinely nothing, the kind of thing that could easily wait until morning without anyone noticing or caring. Trent, still at his desk, saw it first, the way he saw most things first because he was good at his job. He was already gathering his things to leave for his daughter's game, his bag half-zipped, his car keys already in his hand. I can knock this out before I go, he said, glancing at the clock. 10 minutes tops. And I said I remember the exact words, because I've replayed them so many times in my head since that they've worn a groove into my memory like a record played too often. I said, no, go, I've got it, don't make her miss you tonight. It sounds kind. It sounds, on the surface, like the version of me who liked him, who meant it about my mother's hospital stay, who genuinely thought his daughter's soccer game mattered more than a shipment discrepancy, that could easily wait 12 hours without consequence. But underneath the kindness, underneath the words I actually said out loud, was a second sentence I never let myself say, not even in my own head, not directly. If you leave, I stay later than you tonight too, and that's one more data point in my favor, one more night the light stays on without you in the room. I sat with that discrepancy until 7:40 p.m. It took 11 minutes to fix. I know because I checked the timestamp later, out of some morbid curiosity about my own behavior. I stretched it into 3 hours by pulling 3 other files I didn't need to pull, refreshing the customs database twice for no reason at all, and rereading an email I'd already read that morning, twice slowly, as if it might say something different the second time. Our director walked by at 7:15, saw me hunched over my monitor, said, "Long night," in that approving tone she'd developed over the past few months, and I said, "Just making sure it's right," and she nodded the nod. The checkmark nod. I'd started to recognize it in my sleep. Trent texted me a photo from the game around 6, his daughter mid-kick, dust kicked up around her cleats, sunlight catching the side of her face, huge grin stretching ear to ear. "She's on fire tonight," asterisk he wrote, 3 exclamation points, the kind of message you only send someone you think is happy for you. I wrote back a heart emoji, just a heart, nothing else. I couldn't think of words that wouldn't feel like a lie. Then I went back to refreshing a database I didn't need to refresh, in an office that was empty except for me and the version of myself I was slowly becoming, a version I hadn't fully met yet, but was getting to know one quiet, unnecessary hour at a time. The restructuring announcement came on a Monday in July, 4 months almost to the day since that first conference room meeting. Our director called me into her office first, always a bad sign or a good one, and you never know which until you're sitting down across from her, watching her hands, trying to read her face before she said a single word. "You've really stepped up these last few months," she said, and I remember how carefully she said it, like she'd practiced the sentence. "The team's noticed, I've noticed." I said thank you. I remember my hands were cold, folded in my lap, even though the office was warm. "We're consolidating 2 roles into one," she went on. "It's been a hard call, genuinely the hardest one I've had to make here. You and Trent were the closest comp on paper, basically identical by every metric we track. But commitment matters. Consistency matters in ways that don't always show up in a spreadsheet. You've shown me both every single day for months." She told me Trent's position was being eliminated, effective in 2 weeks, with a severance package that she assured me was generous, as if that detail was supposed to make either of us feel better about it. She told me she was sorry, that he was a genuinely good employee, one of the best she'd worked with, that this wasn't a reflection of his skill or his character in any way. I sat there and said all the right things, the things you're supposed to say. I said it was hard news. I said I felt for him, that he had a family, that this would be difficult for them. And every word of it was true, which is somehow the part that unsettles me the most even now, months later. I wasn't lying when I said I felt for him. I felt for him completely, entirely, and I had also spent 4 months quietly, carefully, deliberately engineering exactly this outcome, and both of those things were happening inside the same chest at the same time, without one cancelling out the other the way you'd think it should. I didn't have to tell her Trent left at 5. I never said his name in a sentence that could be called sabotage, not once, not in 4 months. I just made sure that every single day, the only variable she could see with her own eyes, the light on, the light off, the shape of a person still hunched at a desk when everyone else had gone home, pointed in one direction, and only one direction, consistently, reliably, like a compass I'd rigged without ever touching the needle. I let a system that rewards visibility over value do the dirty work I didn't have the stomach to do with my own hands, and then I sat in an office and accepted a compliment for it. They asked me not to tell Trent before HR did, standard procedure, don't want employees hearing it secondhand before it's official. I told him anyway that same afternoon in the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors, because I owed him at least the decency of hearing it from someone who liked him rather than a stranger with a folder and a script. He didn't yell. That was almost the worst part somehow. I think I could have handled yelling better. He just went very still, one hand on the railing, and then he said quietly, "I thought it'd be one of us. I didn't think it'd be me. I've got the same numbers as you. I checked once a while back, we're basically identical." And I said, "I know, I'm sorry," and I meant both halves of that sentence completely. He looked at me for a long moment then, not with hatred, not even with real anger, more like he was doing quiet arithmetic of his own, turning something over, the way I'd been doing for months without ever saying it out loud, and he said slowly, like he was working it out as he spoke, "You've been staying really late lately." I didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that wouldn't have been a confession, and some part of me, even in that stairwell, still wasn't ready to confess. "Good for you, I guess," he said, and there wasn't much bitterness in it, which somehow made it worse than if there had been. That's the part that still sits in my chest at night, more than anything else that happened. He wasn't cruel about it, not for 1 second, not even close. He picked up his daughter that evening on time, the way he always had, the way he always would. And I picked up an extra 10 hours a week that I by then no longer needed at all. Trent found another job within 6 weeks, better pay, better title, a company that actually cared whether people made it to their kids' games, that built it into the culture instead of quietly punishing it. We still talk sometimes, every couple of months, a text here and there. He doesn't know the full shape of what I did. He knows I stayed late a lot that spring. He knows the timing was strange, maybe, if he's ever really thought hard about it. But he doesn't know I turned his one real, human, non-negotiable boundary, the boundary of showing up for his daughter, of being present in a way his own father apparently never was for him, a detail he told me once and I never forgot, into the exact weapon that ended his job here. I got his old accounts folded into mine. I got a small raise, smaller than I expected, smaller than what it cost me to earn it. I still stay late sometimes, out of habit now more than strategy, sitting at a desk that's emptier than it used to be, in an office that's quieter than it used to be, doing work that used to be split between two people who liked each other, who used to talk about soccer games and terriers named Biscuit over coffee in the mornings. I think about that discrepancy. I stretched into 3 hours more than I think about almost anything else from that year. 11 minutes of real work, 3 hours of theatre, performed for an audience of one who never even asked to watch. I think about how easy it was, not to hurt him exactly, that's not quite right, but to simply not stop a system that was already leaning toward hurting him, once I realized which way it leaned, once I understood I could tip it further without ever touching it directly. I didn't trick Trent into anything, not in the way you trick someone with a lie, not the way the title of this story might make you think. I tricked a system that was already broken into doing something ugly on my behalf, and I let a good man's one boundary, the boundary of showing up for his daughter, night after night, without fail, become the exact reason he lost his job instead of me. I don't know what that makes me. I've turned that question over more times than I can count, at 2 a.m. in the car, at my desk with the light on and the office empty around me. I know what it made him, at least for a while. Unemployed for 6 weeks, worried probably about bills of his own, and then fine, better than fine eventually at a company that actually deserved him, the way this one never did. I know what it made me too, though. It made me the person who's always here, the light that's always on, the name that comes up first when someone wants to talk about commitment, and some nights, sitting in that quiet after everyone else has gone home, staring at the same glow I used to wield like a weapon, I think that light isn't a check mark at all and never was. I think it's just what's left when you've burned something down to stay warm. If this one sat with you the way it sat with me while I wrote it, don't forget to subscribe.